Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Darksiders 2 is an action adventure with some light RPG elements. This game came out in 2012 and it was obviously a sequel to Darksiders from 2010. With a budget of $50 million, the sequel was one of the most expensive games ever made. THQ, the publisher of the game, had to sell at least 2 million copies just to break even. According to some reports from back then, the game was struggling to sell 1 million, let alone 2 million copies. Unfortunately, the underwhelming sales for Darksiders 2 was one of the reasons why THQ went bankrupt back in 2013.
I think we're in trouble.
The studio that developed the game suffered from the same fate in 2013. Vigil Game Studio was owned by THQ, however they managed to create a new studio shortly after that and developed Darksiders Genesis and a couple of other games. The reception of Darksiders 2 was not amazing by any means, but it was pretty decent overall. It's currently sitting on very positive recent reviews and mostly positive total reviews on Steam. On GOG it has 3.8 total score, on Metacritic it has 81 from critics and 80 from users. A lot of bad reviews that some people left are related to the technical state of the game, which is not really that good, even today. The Definitive Edition was the final version of the game, which includes all DLCs, along with some major quality of life improvements. However, even this final version of the game still has some notable technical issues. During my playthrough, I had more than a few crashes and poor performance in a lot of areas. One of the crashes I had required a very specific fix. I had to make sure I don't level up after a cutscene. So yeah, that's not a good thing to have in your so-called Definitive Edition. I wouldn't say those issues are game breaking, but it's definitely something you should keep in mind. So what about the game itself, C4G? Well, I'm glad you asked.
The Reaper. It's about time you came.
Darksiders 2 is not exactly a direct sequel, but the whole premise of the story is related to the happenings of the first game. Just like in the first game, the main protagonist is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This time around you play as Death itself, and your main mission is to find a way to rescue your brother War. War was the main protagonist and the playable character from the first game. This is the main thing of this franchise because every Darksiders game features a different horseman of the apocalypse as the main character. I have to say that getting to play as Death itself is quite possibly the edgiest thing you can do.
And who are you to command a rider?
On a totally unrelated note, Death really reminds me of undead characters from World of Warcraft, especially because of the hairstyle. Anyway, I have to say that I never played the first game, or any Darksiders games as a matter of fact. But since I knew that it's not really a huge requirement to play these games in a chronological order, I decided to start with the second game. However, I do plan to go back and play the first game eventually, as well as other Darksiders games. I hope I'm not going to drive you mad if you have OCD, but this is usually how I get into a new game series, by starting somewhere in the middle or from the end. Don't judge me, okay? Come to think of it, this can give me a slightly different perspective on games, and I think that's pretty interesting, especially for these reviews. In this particular case, I knew about the first game and I watched some of my friends play it before. So I was familiar with War from the first game, well, at least on the surface level. Speaking of War, shortly after you begin the game, you find out that he is wrongfully accused for causing apocalypse on Earth, and he was detained by the Charred Council. That wants to save him at all costs because he knows that War is not guilty for the apocalypse, but mostly because he really loves his brother.
He is innocent. Are you so certain?
That comes off as a very caring brother, which is a pretty weird thing to say in a sentence. This persists through the whole campaign in every single cutscene and dialogue where your brother is mentioned.
I would stand with you, Uriel. My brother's fate takes me on another path.
You really get the feeling like he would do anything it takes to save his brother from this eternal prison. The story about angels and demons in games can easily become cheesy, cringe or generic, but I wouldn't use any of those adjectives for describing the story of Darksiders 2. This game takes the story very seriously and it works great for the most part.
What is this? I don't like being toyed with.
A little bit of humor wouldn't kill the game, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't have any comedic relief characters. Speaking of characters, I think the game has done an amazing job. Everyone you meet is pretty memorable, in large part because of the amazing presentation this game has.
Don't touch me.
Your arrival here is a bad omen. Yes. troubles me greatly.
I really can't stress this enough, everything related to the presentation is simply amazing, even by today's standards. Timeless artistic style, great in-game cutscenes, and top-notch voice acting, which helps with bringing these characters to life. Some parts of the story were a bit confusing at first, especially in the dialogue with the Crowfather about the necklace. Although this gets resolved a bit later, but it was still not that clear to me until I started reading the wiki page for the game. But shortly after this, the story takes a very simple path that's easy to follow. Like I said before, your main goal is to save your brother War from eternal imprisonment. But instead of trying to save him directly, Death plans to bring the mankind from extinction, which would restore the balance to the universe. This would also save his brother War because he was accused of destroying the mankind in the first place. The main thing which gets in your way is the corruption which is spreading through the entire world. And by entire world, I mean all realms of existence. There are 5 major locations in the game that you'll get to visit throughout the main campaign. The Forge Lands is the first location you get to explore after you defeat the Crowfather in the beginning. You need to get to the Tree of Life so you can restore the mankind, but this huge corruption is blocking the paths. The people you meet here are called the Makers, and they look like really big dwarfs. From this point on, the game opens up and it lets you experience the gameplay at your own pace. Besides the main quest, you can explore the Forge Lands and do some side quests for the Makers and find stuff to loot. Every map in Darksiders 2 is open, but they don't have a lot of locations to explore. It's not exactly your typical open world game. You have some wide open areas, but all of them will lead you to just a couple of major locations you'll need to visit anyway. We'll talk more about this in the gameplay section.
And how do we do that?
Darksiders 2 has a really defined gameplay loop. You might get a wrong idea about this entire game by just watching gameplay videos and trailers, at least I did. I thought it's an action-adventure game with some platforming elements, but it's exactly the opposite. It's very heavy on the climbing, jumping and puzzles, and you have combat encounters in between. I would say it's something around 65% platforming and 35% combat. Even a lot of boss fights play out like puzzles, because you have to use the same abilities in a similar manner. However, I don't think the game lacks action gameplay in general, although if you hate platforming and especially the puzzles, you'll probably hate this game as well. We'll talk more about the gameplay soon enough, but let's first finish the story discussion. It's hard to talk about the story without spoiling anything, so we'll move to the spoiler discussion very soon. But even spoiling the story is not a big deal if you ask me, because it doesn't have very impactful plot twists, even though the story itself is quite interesting. Your main goal never changes, but of course you'll have to jump through a lot of hoops in every major zone before you can achieve it. Some characters you meet will put you to a test before they tell you what you need to know, while others will ask for your help. But no matter what you have to do in the story, the gameplay is always very methodical. There is a ton of jumping, climbing, using special abilities to solve puzzles, along with some combat in between. That's pretty much the entire game. There is a very interesting level that's an exception to this rule, but we'll get to that. The story itself is pretty simple, but what keeps it from being boring and generic are great characters, very good dialogue and, like I said, amazing presentation. It's a very linear story, by the way, but you always have a couple of extra dialogue options where you can learn a bit more about what's going on. I had a few gripes with the story though. The game could have done a much better job with showing the player why he should care about war in the first place. Although I think this is only a problem if you didn't play the first game. You will probably have at least some sort of attachment to that character if you played the first game. You get to see him and fight him in the very beginning of the game, but it was just the illusion of the Crowfather. They could easily include some flashbacks from the story of Darksiders, which would help the players who didn't play the first game. It's not the end of the world, but it is what it is. The second thing I didn't like is the part where the story starts messing with the time travel. Traveling through time is usually the laziest way you can tell a story because it leaves you with a ton of questions and plot holes. Then the game has to find some artificial limitations for why you can simply use the time travel to directly fix your main problem. I think that's always pretty stupid. Although in this case the time travel seems to be included because of the gameplay, and it was a cool idea from that standpoint. Ultimately, I enjoyed the story of Darksiders 2 quite a bit and the ending was pretty solid. Speaking of which, let's talk about some spoilers. Feel free to skip this section by using the timestamp. We good? Okay. Well, it turns out that the source of corruption is actually one of your brothers that you killed called Absalom.
Humans are weak and simple, they would not survive this resurrection, nor do they deserve it.
The Nephilim race used to have a lot more members, until death killed them all, including Absalom. The souls of Nephilim were trapped in the necklace, but Absalom became the corruption. Probably because he was the firstborn Nephilim and he can't die or some shit, I don't know. You meet Absalom right before you make your way to the Kingdom of the Dead, and he's also the end boss. He was just pissed that you killed him, so he decided to destroy everything, I guess. This was a pretty decent fight, but it was not the hardest or the coolest if you ask me. But after you defeat him, there is a really cool scene.
Take my hand once more, brother.
Then the Crowfather appears and he tells you that you have to sacrifice yourself in order to restore the humankind and save your brother. If I understood it correctly, he could also choose to save the Nephilim and keep the humankind destroyed. However, Death didn't hesitate at all, he instantly chose to save his brother and he jumps into the Well of Souls. Now, the ending cutscene was a bit weird and confusing to me. War summons the Riders of the Apocalypse and that's it. Apparently this is the epilogue from the ending of the first Darksiders and I found that out from the wiki page. I don't think the game has to explain everything, but a little bit more context wouldn't hurt. And that's pretty much it, the end. Darksiders 2 has a very satisfying action gameplay which could have been amazing if not for some very annoying problems. Death is a force to be reckoned with even from the very beginning of the game. Your main weapon is the sights and you also get a second weapon slot for heavy weapons or fast dual wielding weapons. The whole combat system is based around combos and the game has an RPG progression system. You will level up, learn new abilities and combos as well as loot armor pieces and weapons of different quality. The fundamentals of this combat system are great. Every animation looks amazing, the controls are snappy and the sound effects are very impactful. It's a very aggressive style of combat focused on attacking, with occasionally getting out of the way by using your dodge button. Speaking of dodge, you can perform up to 3 dodges in a row, and the third one will lock you into animation for a second. Enemy attacks are well telegraphed and it's usually very easy to see a big attack coming. Well, except when the camera doesn't get in a way, but we'll get to that in a second. You will find use for both weapon types, especially because it's very easy to switch them in a combo. There are combos that allow you to seamlessly combine both of your weapons and I found those the most useful throughout the game. However, I think Darksiders 2 suffers from a common problem which you can find in most action-adventure games with a combo system. I could never find a proper use for longer, more complicated combos. If you try to focus on executing a specific combo, you'll usually get hit. The simplest combos that you get from the very beginning is basically all you need for the entire game. I'm not saying you shouldn't learn any combos, but even spamming the buttons and just moving out of the way when the time is right will get most enemies killed. Don't get me wrong, it's not a mindless button mash, you definitely have to focus on dodging attacks, especially on higher difficulties. You have a choice between 2 different skill trees where you can unlock a couple of unique abilities and improve them with passive skills. Even though I love similar RPG progression systems, I feel like this was a bit forced, to be honest. I never felt that my character is getting stronger, which is the whole point of the progression system in the first place. The damage number on weapons is kinda noticeable and you'll definitely need stronger armor pieces if you don't wanna get one-shotted. But that's pretty much it, the RPG progression system feels a bit tacked on. I still prefer to have it in the game though, but this is how it felt to me. I was playing the game on the second highest difficulty called Apocalyptic. Even though the game had a couple of boss fights that gave me some trouble, I wouldn't exactly call the game hard on this difficulty. You can use up to 5 health potions in a fight, which was always more than enough. What made my playthrough a lot easier in general is the health steal on this axe. You can find different elemental damage on weapons, but I think health steal is definitely the most useful. I found a lot stronger weapons that deal more damage, but they never felt as useful as the healing you get from this axe. Like I said, I don't think the damage and the progression system in general are a huge factor in the game. The action gameplay is so fast that you can easily make up for the lack of damage on weaker weapons. The abilities you can learn are very useful though, but mostly for fighting regular enemies. A lot of bosses require you to use one of your special abilities you get for solving puzzles. I like heavy weapons a lot in this game because they deal some great damage at the cost of being really slow. However, you can start the attack with your sights and switch to heavy weapon in the middle of the combo so you don't lose on the movement speed. The movement speed in this game is a bit weird. You don't have the running button, this is your default speed on foot. But you can swim a lot faster than this and sprint with your horse in the open. Okay. That also has an ultimate form which ignores almost all types of damage and you get to deal some free damage whilst in this form. For the majority of the campaign you can deal some very good damage in this form even on bosses. But later in the playthrough it seems like the damage you deal on bosses is very low. Probably for balancing reasons because the game is not that hard anyway, so this would only make it a lot easier. Maybe there are some abilities in the tree for increasing the damage in this form, I didn't pay that much attention. Speaking of bosses, most of them have some gimmicky mechanic that you have to do, but they're not bad. The difficulty of these bosses increases quite a bit later in the game, but once again, they are not extremely hard. I think Samael and Archon were the hardest bosses in the game. They managed to kill me more than a couple of times and they don't rely on those gimmicky abilities, well at least not as much as the other bosses. The end boss is a pretty good fight as well, but I would rate it below these two bosses I mentioned. By the way, the game has an abundance of boss fights, but most of them are pretty easy if you ask me. On the other side, the number of different enemy types is decent, although I think some of them are overused. Especially when the game throws at you a couple of the same elite monsters that you killed before. Yeah, it likes to do that a lot. Now let's talk about the biggest problem of this combat system, which will be the camera. The camera angles can be atrocious at times, which almost made me quit the game entirely. It has a mind of its own. The gameplay is very fast, so when the camera is clashing with the environment in the middle of the action, it becomes extremely janky. It gets really hard to see what's going on the screen, especially when you're fighting a lot of enemies. Using the lock-on button makes the camera even worse, especially in close quarters. I mean, I get what they're trying to do here, it makes the gameplay look more cinematic and close to action, but that's just good in theory. The simplest solution would be to just zoom out the camera, but you can't do that. The camera is fine outside of combat, but even then it doesn't really get along with the game. For example, elevators will just automatically pan the camera down for some reason, and your line of sight is very limited when you're jumping up the walls. The camera is definitely the biggest problem I have with this game. When it comes to platforming, I think the game does a great job for the most part. I'm not exactly a huge fan of puzzles in general, but when the game does a great job with this, I can definitely enjoy them. Darksiders 2 does an amazing job with introducing the player to these mechanics and abilities you have to use. All major locations in the game have a unique mechanic when it comes to puzzles, and you get to learn that shortly after you discover a new map. It starts off really simple, but as you would expect, they get a lot harder as you progress through the game. They never get extremely hard and frustrating, but some of them will make you think a bit more, that's for sure. Even though I like how the game tries to stay fresh with these mechanics through the entire campaign, it feels a bit overdone near the end of the game. For example, the portals you had up to this point could only be used to jump from one location to another in specific places. But now they turn into a time traveling portal and they bring you back on the same place in the past. I'm not saying that this part of the game is badly designed, but it gets a bit confusing. Or maybe I was just getting tired of puzzles in general, I don't know.
Yes, it troubles me greatly.
Overall, they did an amazing job with these puzzles. They really tried to keep them interesting through the entire campaign, and I think they were mostly successful with that. I briefly touched upon the world map and different locations in the game. For some reason I thought this is the whole map of the game, but it's only one of 5 major locations. These maps can make the world seem a lot bigger than it actually is. I'm kinda struggling to see the point of these open areas, even though they look great and it's fun to ride your horse around. There is almost nothing to do besides a couple of side quests and looting stuff. Some of the side quests will make you fight unique bosses, but I found them even easier than most of the bosses from the main campaign. I didn't do all the side quests though, so I might be wrong. I mentioned before that one of the maps will switch up the gameplay formula quite a bit. That will be the part when you get to Earth. This entire level is designed for a third-person shooter basically, which was kinda weird at first, but I actually like it a lot. You get to use 2 different guns because angels in this game are from Texas, I guess.
Yeehaw!
To be honest with you, the mechanics in this level are not amazing by third-person shooter standards, but it was a nice change of pace after all the platforming and regular combat. Enemies come in packs, and the only thing you need to worry about is overheating and dodging. As you progress through the main campaign, you will unlock additional campaigns that you can play. I believe these additional campaigns came from the DLCs, which are automatically included in the Definitive Edition. I still didn't complete them, so I can't really talk about them now, maybe in some future video. I did get to play the Crucible though, which is like a horde mode, although I'm not sure if that's from the DLC. If you like the base game, I guess you'll get more content for these DLCs, which is great. I think you already know how I feel about the visuals, but let's add a couple of things. All maps in the game have a unique look and feel to them. The colors blend so well, and this game has some amazing sceneries.
Rumors are all that escape the vortex of a mad Queen Lilith who still clings to rule.
The characters have a really cool visual design, except the makers, I guess. They're not bad, but they just look like big generic dwarfs. Pretty much every other character you meet is a lot cooler, if you ask me. The lighting in this game is pretty basic, but when the game looks like this, it doesn't really matter a lot. It's a 10 years old game, but it aged so well because of the artistic style. The textures on the other hand are not that amazing. I notice a lot of low resolution textures all over the place, but I don't think this is a big deal. I was playing on 4K and the highest settings, and like I said before, the performance is not all that great. The frame rate usually drops to 50 or even lower sometimes depending on the location. I was able to get 60 FPS for the most part, and those frame drops didn't really affect my gameplay that much. Music in this game is a hit and miss in my opinion. It's not bad by any means, and it's definitely an interesting choice of tracks for this kind of setting. They could have easily went with the most obvious choice and picked some heavy metal tracks, which would probably fit well with the theme of the game. But nope, we got bagpipes instead, why not? This is actually my favorite track in the game. Other tracks are not so memorable, but the environmental music is pretty decent in all locations. The sound effects are great in general, in and out of combat, zero complaints here. Same goes for the voice acting. You can really tell that the budget for this game was astronomical.
If the Guardian is your masterwork, how am I to complete him?
In the forest lies another construct, one of the few remaining who have not fallen to corruption.
I am the one you seek. And where else would I be but the city of the dead?
Darksiders 2 is a must-play if you like action-adventure games. Although if you hate puzzles, it's probably not for you, but I think you would miss out on a great game. The camera has the potential to ruin your experience, but I'm actually really glad I didn't quit the game because of it. The action gameplay can feel a bit outdated for today's standards, but ultimately, the combat in this game is fast-paced and really fun. It took me around 20 plus hours to complete the main campaign, but you can get a lot more content from doing all the side quests and completing those 3 DLCs. If you decide to get this game, I have a little deal with people from GOG. You will get a huge discount if you use my codes. Click for Darksiders 2. You'll be supporting the channel by using the codes and you get a great deal for the game. This deal is active until 4th of December. Anyway, tell me your opinion about Darksiders 2 in the comments below. Did you play other Darksiders games, and if you did, how would you rate Darksiders 2? Let me know. Make sure to subscribe if you like this kind of content, and liking the video is highly appreciated. If you want to support me directly, becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member would be the best way to do it. Even the smallest support means a lot. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.